didn't think it was,
Yeah, we on there live right now.
that I was inclined not to stay around if he wasn't listening to advice from me or his other cabinet secretaries.
Hope we can hear it.
So on December 14th, Barr quit. Now, the Attorney General wasn't the only person who told the President that his claims were false.
This is Sunspot.
Other officials and close advisors told him the same thing.
Rather than try to address a counterfactual or a hypothetical, let me just say there were instances where the President would say, people are telling me
about
this,
the
or
January 6th.
or I saw on television, this impropriety in Atlanta or Pennsylvania or something. We were in a position to say, how people have already looked at that, and we know that you're getting bad information. That's not correct.
Yes, this is live.
It demonstrated to be incorrect from our point of view, and been debunked.
A month and a half or so after the election day, and at that meeting, various allegations of fraud were discussed, and Eric and Pat didn't, told the group, the President included, that none of those allegations had been substantiated to the point where they could be the basis for any litigation challenge to the election.
President Trump's own vice president and his top advisors also knew that there wasn't evidence to support the claims that the president was making.
Anyone else other than Mr. Meadows who asked you about the status, outside of your legal group, Mr. Morgan and the others you mentioned, anyone else who asked you the status of what you were finding in your assessment of it?
Yes, sir.
Who's that?
Peter Navarro.
There's a question from the committee.
When did you talk to Mr. Navarro?
Alex Cannon, former campaign lawyer.
November.
Around the same time as Mr. Meadows?
Yes, sir.
And tell me about that.
This is his deposition? About the hearing.
I recall him asking me questions about Dominion and maybe some other categories of allegations of voter fraud. And I remember telling him that I didn't believe the Dominion allegations because I thought the hand recount in Georgia would resolve any issues with the technology problem and with Dominion or Dominion flipping votes. And I mentioned at that time that the CISA, Chris Krebs, had recently released a report saying that the election was secure. And I believe Mr. Navarro accused me of being an agent of the deep state working with Chris Krebs against the president. And I never took another phone call from Mr. Navarro.
Anyone else besides Mr. Meadows, Mr. Navarro?
Do the agent on him.
You had
Do it on him.
with inquiring about what you were finding in your
Do the agent like blind on him.
the allegations that were pouring in.
That was crazy.
I believe I had about a 15-second conversation with the vice president about it as well.
When was that?
During one of the visits to the White House, I don't know which one.
Probably give you
I think it
just
was the
15
first one
seconds
in
at a time.
November. I had met him briefly at the campaign, and he remembered me and saw me. And he asked what I was doing on the campaign, and I told him that we were looking into some of the issues related to voter fraud. And he asked me, I don't remember his exact words, but he asked me if we were finding anything. And I said that I didn't believe we were finding it, or I was not personally finding anything
You wanted a strategy.
sufficient to alter the results of the election. And he thanked me. That was our interaction.
Ah, he fell on your sword.
At a later hearing,
Good job.
you'll hear live testimony from the former acting Deputy Attorney General of the Department of Justice, Rich Donahue. But now I'd like to play a portion of his testimony.
Uh-oh.
I tried to, again, put this in perspective and to try to put it in very clear terms to the president. And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed. We've looked at Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada. We're doing our job. Much of the info you're getting is false.
Right.
And then I went into, for instance, this thing from Michigan, this report about 68% error rate. Reality is it was only 0.0063% error rate, less than 1 in 15,000.
Yeah.
So the president accepted that. He
At
said,
first.
okay, fine, but what about the others? And again, this gets back to the point that there were so many of these allegations that when you gave him a very direct answer on one of them, he wouldn't fight us on it, but he would move to another allegation.
So what about that one?
So then I talked about a little bit about the Pennsylvania truck driver. This is another allegation that had come up. And this claim was by a truck driver who believed, perhaps honestly, that he had transported an entire tractor-trailer truck full of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania.
Who drives a truck
And
with
this was,
just
again, out
ballots
there
in
in the
it?
public and discussed. And I essentially said, look, we looked at that allegation. We looked at both ends, both the people who load the truck and the people who unload the truck. And that allegation was not supported by the evidence.
Oh, willy-nilly.
Again,
During the election
said,
time.
okay. And then he said, no,
Who
I
does
didn't
that?
mention that one. What about the others? And I said, okay, well, with regard to Georgia, we looked at the tape, we interviewed the witnesses. There is no suitcase. The president kept fixating on this suitcase that
There's a
supposedly
suitcase,
had
y'all.
fraudulent
Where
ballots.
is the suitcase?
was rolled out from under the table. And I said, no, sir, there is no suitcase. You can watch that video over and over. There is no suitcase. There is a wheeled bin where they carry the ballots, and that's just how they move ballots around that facility. There's nothing suspicious about that at all.
It's like spy versus spy. There gotta be a suitcase.
One part of that allegation was that they were taking one ballot and scanning it through 3 or 4 or 5 times to rack up votes, presumably for Vice President Biden. I told them that the video did not support that.
There's a kid somewhere
Then
with
he went
crayons
off on
drawing voting
Top of the
ballots.
next page, he said, dead people are voting.
Dead people.
Indians are getting paid to vote.
Indians getting paid to vote. What's going on here?
He said there's lots of fraud going on here. Told him flat out that much of the information he's getting is false and or just not supported by the evidence. We look at the allegations, but they don't pan out.
Mr. Barr and his advisors were not the only ones who determined that the president's allegations regarding Dominion voting machines were false. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record of this hearing reports issued by the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA, that addressed and rejected the claims of manipulation of voting machines in the 2020 election.
Yeah, remember they talked about the
Without
Russians.
objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also ask
Talk
unanimous
about
consent to include in the record a report prepared by the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee that disproved claims of election fraud in Michigan, as well as a statement by 59 of the country's leading election security scientists, noting the absence of any credible evidence that the 2020 election had been altered through technical compromise, and 5 other reports from organizations and individuals confirming there was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election or describing the spread of the former president's lies.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
All right. Next to the chairman,
Pursuant to
Thompson.
the order of the committee for today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Okay, there you have it so far. They're in recess right now. This is the January 6th. I came in late. No salute to that. Yeah, I know. But you got to whip of what's going on. It's basically leaning towards the voter fraud and the faulty data with no based on no evidence. It's just like the conspiracy theories and you know it's just insane. You know, these are supposed to be intelligent people. Intelligent people. The guy said he had a truckload of ballots just rolling from New York to Pennsylvania, just rolling around. And then the accusation of the dead people voting, and you know what they're talking about. They're talking about people using names of deceased people to put on the ballots. And so now you have to corral all these people that took the names. And where did they get the names from? You gotta be able to, get to that paper trail. Then it said the Indians, salute the Indians voted. Salute to them, right? The Indians started to put on the ballots. They don't count for nothing, right? Yo, this is slick. So you got the laid out part of the deposition with Bill Barr, and then the former campaign attorney. I said his name earlier, Cheney, something like that. I don't know. There's gonna be a lot of characters coming in and out. If you like the Amber Heard trial, you're gonna love this one. You like that one, you're gonna love this one. So they for 10 minutes they bounced out. Yeah, my audio was kind of janky, so I'm waiting for them to come through. I might be late. When they come in, but nonetheless, I got my chat up, and we flowing. We actually flowing. I don't want to get on camera right now. Oh God. Oh goodness. Here's a brief intro, then we'll be back. And there you go. We'll be back. Amazing. So let's go down the line. Let me see if I can get some notes together for you about this Jan 6 hearing, which is very important. This is one of the, it's going to be a history shifting case because, in no time, there's a couple in the past, but, such an event has taken place. I don't know, maybe they did just push the button and say, yo, it's time now. Everybody want to make that move to be engraved in history. Putin going to war, that's an engravement. We're not even listening and hearing about what's going on in the Congo, right? So, of course our attention spans are all over the place. A guy woke up just recently, a major figure in AI, and found that the AI is actually developing its own brain. Salute to that.
Super Dad Luke here is helping his daughter with her science fair.
That's me.
Alexa's got project prep down to a science.
Okay, I'm not trying to. All right. The 31 members of white nationalist Patriot Front were arrested in their Pride event in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Now, just recently, their mugshots have been placed up, and wow, it's just and that's what Jeff Sessions said. Even at the same time, he the FBI said that there's black identity extremists, and beware of them. They also said that the biggest threat to the government was domestic terrorism, from white supremacist groups. Get a load of that. Get a load of that. Interesting. That the same I want to start separating things and all like that because we're all in the same boat right now as far as the economy and inflation and all that. Yet your energy is directed to, doing something that would destabilize everything. That means you're willing to feed your own people just beans and soup. You know, well, that's the price of revolution, of course. I don't knock that, but at what cost? At what cost? For who? For the man that was with the WWE for a while, slamming Vince McMahon around. At what cost? We're too much into the personality worship, and it's just frustrating. And I get it because we have one right now that's not doing too well as far as it goes. Let's see, they're back. They should be back in session. We want to roll with that. Let me peep in real quick. All right, they just nah, it's still out. They're all out to lunch, to tell you the truth. They're all out to lunch. Okay, so let me go to the. I did that one, and what was interesting when looking at the mugshots is not everybody's the same complexion or nothing like that, but they're so young, and they ready to go at it, ready to go. What is it? TTG, chain to go. Many of them had an official uniform, and that's one thing that when people talk about certain black groups and nationalists, the organizations are different. One is organizing about resurrecting traditions that were lost, culture, pride, and the protection of their people. Especially of those that can't help themselves. And the other is about changing the course and keeping changing the course of history by taking away a government that has been too governing in some respects. They wish for smaller government, smaller federal interaction, more into state interaction. Which if your state is red, as they say, I don't that color crap, which is corny. But if your state is red, you can maneuver in a more conservative way than what the federal government is offering. And, protection of the militias. That's what is the bottom line. Look, that's the bottom line. And, you actually do need active militias, but in every community, not just one. But then it becomes tyrannical. And everyone should be balanced, and be able to protect their own community, their own neighborhoods, and also economic-wise to focus more on the infrastructure. Focus more on the infrastructure. People likely will have more. People will be more vigilant to protect what's theirs. So the crime decreases. There's more opportunities for people, and you start to succeed and grow. I mean, that's the theory of it. But we have a lot of corrupt characters in play, and tyrannical politicians, career politicians. They don't know no better except the paycheck. Salute to them. They don't know no better except that paycheck. And many of us are not paying attention. Here's an article out of Flipboard from the New York Magazine, The Dismantling of Hong Kong, about a group of people in a highly populated populace, you can say that 5 times, that are not paying attention as well. yet many of the things that are that go with surveillance and to go with rebellion is hushed, and also the procedures to counter it is replicated all over the place, especially in America, in United States cities. So it's heavy surveillance and the suppression of any counter surveillance groups, because it is actually in some ways an invasion of privacy, but it's a necessary evil at the moment. Oh man, it's just, but if you're not paying attention, it's the doctrine of the shades altogether. If you're not willing to exercise your rights, chances are they'll fade away. The dismantling of Hong Kong since 2019, and this is the person that's writing it. They say that their hometown is slowly transformed into a brutal, unrecognizable place. Then came Omicron, one of the heavy viruses that just passed, or is still around. You know what I'm saying? But sheesh. Karen Chung, right? Going on to describe the Omicron cases that climbed to the tens of thousands. It get it to a point where there were curfews going on. The places that you would go to, like the promenade and certain parks, shut down quick. And office workers sitting on benches, clutching plastic containers. And of course, the city hospitals were overflowing with the sick and dying. This is China, in Hong Kong. She's going through how her place of old, has basically become a ghost town, a heavy populace from the Omicron. And she has like this romanticizing of it. The tourists, the people making out in cars, and it was just like a bustling city, and then bang. Omicron, the financial inflation takes place, the supply chain stresses, going through this whole thing. And I'm sure if you've walked downtown to some of your local areas, you'll see many businesses is closed. There have been waves where there are lots of people at one time, and then boom, very few. So and we still have to be cautious and vigilant. We don't know what the next 5 years, how things can transpire. And that's just the reality of it. I know you want to escape it with the nonsense. So I try to balance it all out, you know what I'm saying? But, okay, they're back in session.
The committee will be in order.
Mr.
I now
Thompson,
welcome our
Chairman.
second panel of witnesses. We're joined today by B.J. Pack, Al Smith, and Ben Ginsberg. Mr. Pack is a former United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. Mr. Smith is a former city commissioner for the city of Philadelphia, where he served for more than 10 years. Mr. Ginsberg is one of the leading election law attorneys in the country and has represented Republican presidential candidates in election litigation dating back to 2000, where he represented George W. Bush in the Bush v. Gore litigation.
Oh, shoot.
I will now swear in our witnesses.
The connections are
Please
there.
stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm on the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Ginsburg is up to bat.
Thank you. Please be seated.
He said he does, so we're going to find out.
Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize a gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the break, I think you all heard Mr. Barr and Mr. Donahue talk about the false claims that Mr. Trump and his supporters made about suitcases of fake ballots in Georgia. We have a witness here today who thoroughly investigated that issue. Mr. Pack, I want to thank you for appearing before us today. You were appointed by President Trump to serve as a U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, and you served from 2017 until January of 2021. You were the lead federal prosecutor there and worked for the Department of Justice under then Attorney General Bill Barr. Now, were you ever asked by Attorney General Barr to investigate claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election? And if so, what were those claims?
All right.
Thank you, Congressman Loughran. Thank you for the question. Approximately December 4th, I believe, of 2020, Attorney General Barr and I had a conversation about an unrelated case at issue. At the end of the conversation, Mr. Barr had asked me if I had seen a certain videotape that was being reported in the news where Mr. Giuliani, in a Senate subcommittee hearing that was held the day before, May 3rd, showed a videotape of a purportedly a security tape at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, which is also in Fulton County in the city of Atlanta. Yes. At the time, Mr. Barr asked me that he had made a public statement that he had not seen any widespread election fraud that would question the outcome of the election. And because of the videotape and the serious allegation that Mr. Giuliani was making with respect to the suitcase full of ballots reported in the video, he asked me to find out what I could about it, because he had envisioned that in some days after our call that he was going to go to the White House for a meeting, and then that issue might come up. He asked me to make it a priority to get to the bottom of, to try to substantiate the allegations made by Mr. Giuliani.
Thank you. I understand the Georgia Secretary of State's office investigated those State Farm Arena allegations and didn't find any evidence of fraud. What did you find when your office conducted its own investigation?
Do not own the rights.
We found that the suitcase full of ballots, the alleged black suitcase that was being seen pulled from under the table, was actually an official lockbox where ballots were kept safe. We found out that there was a mistake in terms of a misunderstanding that they were done counting ballots or tallying ballots for the night, and the partisan watchers that was assigned by each of the respective parties were announced to send home. Well, once they realized the mistake, someone from the Secretary of State's office had indicated that no, we're not done for the night. You need to go ahead and continue counting. So once they packed up the lockbox full of ballots, they brought back the official ballot box again and continued to tally the ballots from the lockbox. Unfortunately, during the Senate hearing, Mr. Giuliani only played a clip that showed them pulling out the official ballot box from under the table and referring to that as a smoking gun of fraud in Fulton County. But in actuality, in review of the entire video, it showed that that was actually an official ballot box that was kept underneath the tables, and then we saw them pack up because the announcement that they thought they were done for the night, and then once the announcement was made that you should continue counting, they brought the ballot box back out, and they continued to count. The FBI interviewed the individuals that are depicted in
I'm sure there's security
the videos.
around here.
Purportedly were double, triple counting of the ballots.
Public or private.
Determined that nothing irregular happened in the counting, and the allegations made by Mr. Giuliani were false.
Boom.
Thank you very much. I'd like to play again the testimony from Mr. Donahue, who appeared before the committee before today.
Mr. Donahue, we talked at some length about whether or not the White House or the President was informed about the Antrim report. on the results of the investigations, the interviews that have gone on Fulton County, how would those results have been communicated to the White House, to the President?
This is Mr. Donahue.
I don't know how they were initially communicated. I do know that they came up in subsequent conversations with the President.
Acting
and
deputy.
Dad Rose and I essentially told him we looked into that and it's just not true.
Okay, so he was informed.
I told the President myself that several times in several conversations, that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we looked at the video, we interviewed the witnesses, it was not true.
Wow.
Mr. Pack, after you left the U.S. Attorney's Office on January 4th, 2021, did the next U.S. Attorney there, I think Mr. Trump's personal pick, Bobby Christine, did he investigate any remaining claims of fraud? And if so, did he find any evidence that supported the President's claims of voter fraud?
It is my understanding that Mr. Christine continued any investigations that were pending at the time of my departure, but he was unable to find any evidence of fraud that affected the outcome of the election.
They made it up, man.
So after investigating the President's and Mr. Giuliani's claims about voter fraud in Georgia, is it your view today that there was no evidence of widespread fraud sufficient to undermine confidence in the outcome of the election in Georgia?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Pack. And I want to thank you also for the service that you've given to our country. We appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what's up. That's what's up.
Next, I'd like to turn to President Trump's false allegations about election integrity in Philadelphia. The Attorney General discussed these allegations at some length.
He wanted to throw Philadelphia away.
You know, the idea, the President has repeatedly suggested that there was some kind of outpouring of unexpected votes in inner city areas like Philadelphia as recently as January 13th when he walked off the NPR set. He was asked by the interviewer, what's your evidence of fraud? And he said more people voted in Philadelphia than there were voters. And that was absolutely rubbish. The turnout in Philadelphia was in line with the state's turnout, and in fact, it was not as impressive as many suburban counties, and there was nothing strange about the Philadelphia turnout. It wasn't like there was all these unexpected votes that came out in Philadelphia. So, I think once you actually look at the votes, and then there's an obvious explanation. For example, in Pennsylvania, Trump ran weaker than the Republican ticket generally. He ran weaker than two of the state candidates. He ran weaker than the congressional delegation running for federal Congress, and he ran weaker than the Republican, I think. I haven't looked at this recently, but he generally was
punching the
a weak element on the Republican ticket. So that does not suggest that the election was stolen.
Bill Barr sold him out. That's what
How about Pennsylvania and Bill McSwain? We were talking to the attorney in Philadelphia about an alleged discrepancy between the number of absentee ballots issued and the number of ballots cast.
Right. So that was one of the big ones for a period of time. I think that was raised at Gettysburg by Giuliani or something like that. But it kept on being repeated, and I found it annoying because it didn't seem that it was right. So I called McSwain, and he got back to me. He said, no, the problem is that Mastriano threw out this number, and what he did was he mixed apples and oranges. He took the number of applications for the Republican primary, and he compared it to the number of absentee votes cast in the general election. But once you actually look and compare apples to apples, there's no discrepancy at all. And that's one of the. I think at some point I covered that with the president.
These are intelligent, high-powered business people making millions of dollars at a time.
Today who has detailed knowledge about the election process in Philadelphia. Mr. Schmidt, at the time of the 2020 presidential election, you were serving as the only Republican member of Philadelphia's 3-member city commission, which is responsible for overseeing elections throughout the city. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Schmidt.
So President Trump made numerous claims regarding fraudulent voting practices in Philadelphia, including the claim that dead people were voting. In fact, Mr. Giuliani told Pennsylvania state legislators that 8,000 dead people voted in Pennsylvania.
Yo.
You investigated those claims of voter fraud. Can you tell us what you found?
Not only was there not evidence of 8,000 dead voters voting in Pennsylvania, there wasn't evidence of 8. We took seriously every case that was referred to us, no matter how fantastical, no matter how absurd, and took every one of those seriously, including these.
As it turns out, even Mr. Trump's campaign lawyers knew that the dead voter claims weren't valid.
I guess the crooks in Philadelphia are disappointed in this. They only submitted 8,021 ballots from dead people, mail-in ballots for dead people. Probably easier for dead people to submit mail-in ballots than it is to vote in person.
Rudy was, at this stage of his life, in the same ability to manage things at this level, or not? And obviously, I think Bernie Carrot publicly said it. They never proved the allegations that they were making.
Mr. Schmidt, on November 11th, 2020, President Trump tweeted about you, saying, and here's a quote, "A guy named Al Schmidt, a Philadelphia commissioner and so-called Republican, or Rhino, is being used big time by the fake news media to explain how honest things were with respect to the election in Philadelphia. He refuses to look at a mountain of corruption, dishonesty. We win." As a result of that tweet and the CNN interview you gave where you stated the dead voter claims in Pennsylvania were false, you and your staff were subjected to disturbing threats. Can you tell us about that?
The threats prior to that tweet, and on some level it feels almost silly to talk about a tweet, but we can really see the impact they have, because prior to that, the threats were pretty general in nature. Corrupt election officials in Philadelphia are going to get what's coming to them. You're what the Second Amendment is for. You're walking into the lion's den, all sorts of things like that. After the president tweeted at me by name, calling me out the way that he did, the threats became much more specific, much more graphic, and included not just me by name, but included members of my family by name, their ages, or address, pictures of their home, just every bit of detail that you can imagine. That was what changed with that tweet.
Behind me are redacted threats that you provided to the committee. Now, we redacted portions of the text to protect your family. Mr. Schmidt, I think I speak for all of my colleagues when I say we are deeply sorry for what you and your loved ones have been through.
Right here in the tweet, Albert Ring Schmidt, Rhino Schmidt committed treason. November 12, 2020.
I want to thank both Mr. Pack and Mr. Schmidt for their service, their testimony.
Wow, I bought receipts.
And for standing up for the rule of law.
Bought the receipts.
Now I'd like to turn to another subject.
Wasn't seeing that coming.
The courts in our country provide a legitimate venue for campaigns to challenge what they view as irregular election practices. Now, courts have the final say on how the law applies to those challenges. We have a renowned legal expert here to address the Trump campaign's activities in court. Mr. Ginsburg, you've spent your entire career representing Republicans in election-related litigation. You served as the National Counsel on Republican presidential campaigns in 2000, in 2004, and in 2012. You played a key role in the 2000 Florida recount that led to the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore. You served as the co-chair of the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. I think it's fair to say you're the most prominent Republican lawyer who's litigated in the election field. Now, you've analyzed the Trump campaign's litigation pretty carefully. What's the normal process for post-election litigation?
What the biggest
How is
cover-up
the Trump
artist in the
campaigns
century?
different
Shout
than
to
the
that.
kinds of post-election litigation you've been involved in and know
I
about?
digress.
In the normal course of things, any campaign on the night of the election and the days after will do a couple of different things. One is that they'll analyze precinct results to look for abnormalities in the results, and they'll send people to those precincts to ask more questions. Secondly, all campaigns will have poll watchers and poll workers and observers in the polling place. And so campaigns will talk to those people if they saw any irregularities that could cause problems in the election. Now, the Trump campaign talked pre-election about having 50,000 poll workers. So presumably, they did have eyes on the ground in all these places.
Right.
And so in the normal course of things, a campaign will analyze the reports that come in. Trump campaign had a couple of basic problems, however. Number one, the 2020 election was not close. In 2000, that was 537 close. In this election, the most narrow margin was 10,000 and something in Arizona, and you just don't make up those sorts of numbers in recounts. And when the claims of fraud and irregularities were made, you've heard very compelling testimony from Mr. Stepien, from Matt Morgan, from Alex Cannon about those claims and how they didn't believe them. So that put the Trump campaign on sort of a process of bringing cases without the actual evidence that you have to have in which the process is designed to bring.
Right, and don't forget the briefcases.
So are you aware of any instance in which a court found the Trump campaign's fraud claims to be credible?
No, there was never that instance. In all the cases that were brought, and I've looked at the more than 60 that include more than 180 counts. And no, the simple fact is that the Trump campaign did not make its case.
The Select Committee has identified 62 post-election lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and his allies between November 4th, 2020 and January 6th, 2021. Those cases resulted in 61 losses and only a single victory, which actually didn't affect the outcome for either candidate.
Oh, my goodness.
Despite those 61 losses, President Trump and his allies claim that the courts refused to hear them out. And as a result, they never had their day in court.
So they call them
Mr.
fake news
Ginsburg,
courts.
what do you say about the claims that
and all
Mr.
this
Trump
stuff.
wasn't given an opportunity to provide the evidence they had of voter fraud? Did they in fact, did they have their day in court?
They did have their day in court. About half of those cases that you mentioned were dismissed at the procedural stage for a lack of standing. The proper people didn't bring the case, or there wasn't sufficient evidence and it got dismissed on a motion to dismiss. But in the other, there was discussion of the merits that was contained in the complaints. And in no instance did a court find that the charges of fraud were real. And it's also worth noting that even if the Trump campaign complained that it did not have its day in court, there have been post-election reviews in each of the 6 battleground states that could have made a difference. And those ranged from the somewhat farcical Cyber Ninjas case in Arizona to the Michigan Senate report that was mentioned earlier, the hand recount in Georgia that Mr. Pack addressed. And in each one of those instances, there was no credible evidence of fraud produced by the Trump campaign or his supporters.
Right.
Thank you. Well, as Mr. Ginsburg has explained, there are no cases where the Trump campaign was able to convince a court that there was widespread fraud or irregularities in the 2020 election.
Listen to conspiracy
over and
theorists,
over,
man.
Judges, appointed by Democrats and Republicans alike, directly refuted this false narrative. They called out the Trump campaign's lack of evidence for its claims, and the judges did that even in cases where they could have simply thrown out the lawsuit without writing a word.
Tried to hit him.
You can see behind me a few excerpts from the decisions in these 62 cases.
On the public.
The Trump campaign's lack of evidence was criticized by judges across the political
wholly
spectrum.
Unreliable.
In Pennsylvania, a Trump-appointed judge concluded, quote, charges require specific allegations and proof. We have neither here.
We have neither here.
Another Trump-appointed judge warned that if cases
Hazy
like these
nebulous.
succeeded, quote, any disappointed loser in a presidential election able to hire a team of clever lawyers could flag claimed deviations from election results and cast doubt on election results. The list goes on and on. Allegations are called, quote, an amalgamation of theories, conjecture, and speculation. In another, strained legal arguments without merit, unsupported by evidence, derived from wholly unreliable sources.
Hazy and nebulous.
Fundamental and obvious misreading of the Constitution. The rejection of President Trump's litigation efforts
these
was
guys are just throwing stuff out there.
22 federal judges
basis
appointed by Republican presidents, including 10 appointed by President Trump himself, and at least 24 elected or appointed Republican state judges dismissed the president's
61
claims.
cases, one win.
At least 11 lawyers have been referred
22 of the judges
for disciplinary
appointed by
proceedings
Republican
due
presidents.
to bad faith and baseless efforts
Wow.
to undermine the outcome of the 2020 presidential election.
10 were
Rudy
Trump
Giuliani
appointed
had
judges.
his license to practice law suspended in New York. Just this week, a newly filed complaint will potentially make his suspension from practicing law in D.C. permanent.
Permanently. Wow.
And as we've just heard from perhaps the most preeminent Republican election lawyer in recent history, the Trump campaign's unprecedented effort to overturn its election laws in court was a deeply damaging abuse of the judicial process. As stated by U.S. District Court Judge David Carter, this was, quote, a coup in search of a legal theory. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today.
All right.
The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record.
Okay, we're going to close out here.
Opening remarks and additional questions.
They're still going on with the
second
hearing.
panel of witnesses is now dismissed.
Okay, they're still going on with the hearing. I'm not going to do much more of that right now. Wow. Let me get a wow.
Oh.
No, again, man, again.
Oh.
It's been amazing, this journey right now. Shoot. Throwing some music or something like that. To wrap it up, baby, I'm gonna wrap it up. It's amazing, like I said, once again, these people make tons of money and set policy for other people. Tons of money, set policies for other people. Just to, like, the common sense is out the window, intelligence diminished. See the allegations, 62 cases, and 61 of them thrown out. One, they won, but there was of no significance. The allegations that there's loose briefcases around and dead people's names on ballots. Who's the forgers? We need to see the forgers. Right. The gangsterism. Mr. Smith, we know who you are, where you stay, where your family stay. He's going hard. He's a treasonous. He don't. They have no backbone. When we get to the bottom of this, they will pay. They will pay. He's going hard. for the cover-up. You know, just to keep power. That's what this whole thing. The positioning to keep power when every other, even if you don't like the person going to office, if the numbers pan out that they won, you got to. You have to pass on the authority. You have to pass on the office. That's been in play. And every time it's from a group that knows it's been doing dirty for so long. Doing dirty. Without a shadow of a doubt, doing dirty. And then complains that the power is not passed on quickly enough or at all. And that's where we are right now. They wanted to base the first part of the hearings on the incendiary tweets and position that the former administrations were taking in trying to garner as much ghost votes. It said the Indians voted. The Indians voted. Amazing. Throw everybody under the bus. But this has been Omega Sun's experiences, late bowl, mix show, the bum rush of the history, of the bum rush of the century. Could this be the bum rush of the century? I don't know. We got the Civil War. War 1812 well, the Civil War is a bum rush. Yeah, this is the bum rush of the century right now. Salute to that. The Bumrush Hearings, Part 1. We're going to go into it next time. I think for everybody that float by, maybe on the replay or whatever, you know, look at the other stuff I got on this page, just in case they shut me down. I got a couple more pages I'm going to deal with. It's some rough out here, you know, to get certain information out. Wellness on your walk with you and yours. And I bid you a peaceful and great day. Let's go.